Hi friends, welcome back to our channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to start building a full stack application. For the front end, we are going to use Angular 17 and for the back end, it will be .NET Core. Now, first of all, for building the Angular application, you have to make sure that you have prerequisites installed on your system. So first of all, you'll have to go to this particular website, nodejs.org, and download the executable file for installing Node.js on your system. So once you have it on your system, you'll open this file, and as I already have Node.js installed, this is the particular message that I am getting, but you'll not get it. If you don't have it already installed on your system, you'll have the setup completed, and after the installation, we'll move on to the next prerequisites. You'll go to this particular website, Visual Studio Code, and download for your particular OS the installer for Visual Studio Code. Once you have this particular installation completed, we are going to install Angular on the system. And how we do that? We go to command prompt and give this particular command. I press enter and the installation is in progress. npm install -g @angular/CLI. So this will make sure that the latest version of Angular is installed on your system. In this particular video, when you are seeing it, Angular 17 is the version that we are using. Now this says that 225 packages have been changed in 18 seconds. So if you do not already have Angular installed on your system, it could have said the packages are added instead of changed. Once this is done, what you can do is, I already have a folder created over here in my system, and in this particular folder I'm going to create the application that I require for my gadget shop, and I'll be giving it the name with this particular command, ng new hoc gadget shop. This is the application name that I am giving. I press enter. Now what's being asked is, which style sheet format do I want to use, and I want to use CSS. So yeah, basics of HTML and CSS you'd always want to know before beginning any Angular project. Do I want to enable server-side rendering and static site generation? No, I do not want that. So I press no. The installation of the packages is in progress. That means my application is being created. Great. So I have got package installed successfully message over here. That means the application generation has been completed. And how I can make sure is that this is the folder that is created for my new application, HOC Gadget Shop. And what I'll do is, I'll just change the directory over here. That means that I have opened the command prompt inside that directory. Now I can give the command code dot. This is the command that we use to open the Visual Studio Code from this particular application through command prompt. Now Visual Studio Code should open and the application will be opened automatically in this. So over here we have it. The entire structure is ready for our newly generated application. If you take a closer look over here, you'll see that src folder is there, and this is the folder that you want to focus on right now. We have index.html file. So how you can understand is that this is the top tier file of HTML template. Whatever is rendered in the browser, it is being rendered at the top level from here. And inside the body tag we have app-root. So this contains all of the HTML information that will be shown on the screen. How do I make sure that what I am saying is correct? I can show you over here by running the application. So if I just open the terminal over here, this has also opened a PowerShell terminal. We can see over here it says PowerShell terminal. So I'll close this one and we can start working on this particular terminal, which is inside the Visual Studio Code. It's kind of easier to access. I'll run the application. What I am doing is running the application through this particular command, ngserve. It is going to build the application first, make sure that there are no syntactical errors, and then it's going to give me a URL. This is the localhost URL that I have to open. Control and click. The URL is opened. Localhost colon 4200. And this is the entire information that is being rendered through index.html file. But I see over here that I don't have any tag related to what is being shown on the screen. So how do I make sure that this is getting rendered through app-root through this particular app folder? This is the component folder and this is the HTML structure related to it. So if you're already aware about the basics of Angular, it's pretty easy for you. But for the beginners who are going to learn Angular, this is the part where they can focus on. And we see over here that this is the content that has to be replaced. So whatever we are seeing on the screen is being rendered through tags from here, from this particular app component. And this is the .ts file related to it. So whatever TypeScript code we'll be writing over here in this file, and whatever HTML tags we want to give, whatever HTML template we need to provide to the Angular application, we'll do it from here. And the top tier file is index.html. So I hope you have understood the basic structure of the Angular application. And now to make sure that this is the correct file that we are referring to over here, I'll make a change. I just type over here hello. We already saw that in the browser we were seeing this, your app is running. I have written hello over here and saved it. So after I saved it, it says that page reload sent to client. So this is a benefit of using ngserve command, that it will automatically transfer whatever information you have changed, whatever file you have changed, to the browser. You don't have to reload the browser or rerun the application again and again after making your changes. I'll just open the browser again, and over here we can see the changes. So that has made sure that whatever information we are seeing over here, it is being rendered through app.component right now. But we want to make changes to this particular HTML template. We don't want it for our HOC gadget shop. We'll be using some bootstrap to enhance the look of the page. So we'll see how we are going to do that. So first of all, we'll have to install bootstrap in Angular application. And how we'll do that? I press Ctrl+C. That will end the session that is running right now. And now we have to type the command npm install bootstrap save. By using this command, I should be able to successfully integrate bootstrap in my application. See, this is the node modules folder, and if I expand it, you'll see that there is no folder named bootstrap. I have to install it in the application to use it. So that is why I have to run this command. I press enter. Okay, after running the query, it says that Bootstrap is integrated successfully into the application. Over here, we can see that we have the folder now, Bootstrap, in node_modules folder. And we have to include the JavaScript file and the CSS file of the Bootstrap into the application. How will we do that? This is the angular.json file, and over here, if you scroll down, you have on line number 29 for me, styles mentioned, and this is taking the styles from this particular file currently. This is styles.css in the source folder. So over here we have to mention the styles as well as scripts. And what will be the scripts? It will include the JS file from the bootstrap folder. This is the JS file that we want to include over here. We'll take the relative path, node underscore modules, bootstrap. Then we have this folder, JS bootstrap dot bundle dot min dot js. So we have mentioned the JS file in the scripts. So this is kind of global setting that we are making in the application. And we'll also mention the CSS file. This is not JS, it will be CSS bootstrap dot min dot CSS. In the CSS folder you can see this file over here. So I have included in angular.json, and now what we'll do is we'll make some changes in app.component.html. We want to remove everything that is currently existing, and I'll just type this keyword hello over here to make sure that new changes are getting reflected. I'll do an ng-serve to run the application again. Okay, great. So the application is running now, and we see that all of the content that we were seeing earlier on the browser we're not seeing now. We are only seeing hello keyword that we have typed in app.component.html. So what I want to do is I already have some HTML template for the landing page. First of all, what we'll do, we'll add the header for our landing page. So the template that I already have for the header, I have referenced it from Bootstrap website only. So this is the one that we'll be using, and I'll make the changes. I'll save it. It says page reload send to client. Great, I don't have to rerun the application again and again. And you see over here that the new nav bar is coming. This is the header that we want to have in our application. What we can do is make some changes on this. This is HOC gadget shop. So I have replaced that nav bar with HOC gadget shop. We'll keep home as it is. And then we could have admin over here. This could be inventory, and this could be customers. I'll just save it and we can check it also. Yes, these are getting reflected. Inventory, customers. So you see this, all of the changes are getting real-time updated on our application whenever we are changing it. And what I want to do is I can remove link and disabled as of now from the HTML template, because right now we don't need those. I have kept the drop down option available. This is to make sure that you also understand how we use drop downs in the navbar. And saving this. So I come over here. We have inventory and customers. So these are the options that we are primarily going to change. So I hope you have all understood how we have integrated Bootstrap successfully into the application and utilized the CSS over here for our landing page. Now what we'll do is we'll add a component for inventory. So for generating the new inventory component, what we'll have to do is we'll go to the solution and stop the running process with Control C. As I have told before, we'll give the command ng generate component app components slash inventory. So why I have given here app component slash inventory, because what I want the command to do is create a new folder over here, because I want to keep the newly created components in a different folder. So here you can see that app components is generated through this command ng generate component app component slash inventory. And if we open this folder, inventory is the new component over here. We can see that it is created. Now we'll start working in HTML file of the inventory component. Now in this inventory.component.html file, we'll be giving the HTML structure of the inventory component. And how do we travel to this component? Because we know that currently app.component is working. The HTML structure is showing whatever we have given over there. But what I want to do is that on this particular item click, the drop down that we have on the browser, we want to go to this particular component, inventory component, right? So how do we travel to this page? And for that, what we'll be doing is we'll be using routing. So this is a very important concept for you to learn if you are not aware about routing concept already. So please focus here. For the routing to work over here, what we have to do is make this app.component.html like the main template of our solution. So you have to understand that is app.component is like the main page which will be shown on all of the pages. It will be uniform throughout the pages in the application. And after our nav bar, we are going to write router hyphen outlet. So what we want the solution to do is whenever we are changing the pages, after the nav bar, whatever we are giving, whatever HTML template we want to give, it should be displayed through this particular router. What I mean to say is this is the nav bar and we have multiple options. We have inventory, we have customers, and then we have home. So if I click on any of these, whatever template I want to show, it should be displayed through this router outlet. And the router outlet will be displaying whatever HTML structure I am providing in a particular component, that is inventory component over here, because this is the one that we are focusing on right now. So what we want to do is when we click on this particular item, it should show whatever content is being mentioned in this file, in this inventory.component.html. Now for that, what we have to do is we can remove the href from here. We'll mention router link and then we have to give the path. So over here I have mentioned the path, but now what I have to do is define this particular path. And how do I do that? We have to open app.routes.ts. So in the routes array, we'll be giving the path. Mention the path name. This is the path that we gave in the HTML structure, and then mention the component. So we are going to use inventory component. So the IntelliSense is working, and that is why I am going to automatically use it, and this has automatically imported it because the Visual Studio IntelliSense is working over here. If it is not working for you, then you have to import it manually through the given particular file structure that you have and then use it over here. So now I am saving it, and then I am saving this particular file also, app.component.html. I have given the router link over here and I have mentioned router outlet in this particular file only. So what it should display is, it should display whatever is mentioned in this particular file. So let's check if it is working or not. We have to run the solution for that. Okay, so the solution is running, but before we go to the browser through this particular URL, what we have to do is we also have to include the component, the inventory component and the router module in app.component.ts file. So we'll open that, and over here we'll write router modules that we are importing from Angular/router, and import it over here also. And then we are also importing inventory component. So the IntelliSense works and the import is already mentioned here automatically. If it is not working for you, you can mention it manually also, as I have said before. I'll just save this. After saving, we are going to this particular URL. Opened. I go to inventory. Great. So the page says inventory works. That was already mentioned in the HTML template of inventory component. And we have come to this particular path that we gave in the routes file. This is happening after we are clicking over here on the inventory option. So I hope all of you have understood how routing is working in Angular. Through routing, we can go to any particular page. We are not reloading the page, as it's the benefit of using Angular, and we are traversing from one page to another, keeping our main template intact. Because you see over here that we have the nav bar and we are keeping our main template intact and still traversing from one page to another. The main template is mentioned in app.component.html. So after this, what we can do is we can give the correct HTML template over here that we want to have on this particular page. So I'll just paste that particular HTML template over here, remove this inventory works, and I'll be saving this HTML file. Go to the browser on the link. So this is the basic HTML template that I have used, because the whole project series is regarding Angular, and then at the backend we are using .NET Core and SQL for the APIs. We don't want to focus on Bootstrap as much, but I do want all of you to understand how it works and how you can use the Bootstrap integrated into your Angular application. You can use this HTML template if you're building a basic project, and even if you want to enhance the project, you can use the advanced learnings of some CSS. So over here we have the submit form for the inventory details that we want to capture, and you see over here that I have already mentioned some static data in the HTML template in the inventory details table. We are going to populate this particular data dynamically. I'm going to do it with you through the series, and all of this data will be shown dynamically and not directly from the static HTML template. So that we are going to do. But firstly, what we are going to see is how to add a new row, how to submit this particular form for the inventory details, and add this row in our table. That is the first operation of the CRUD operations, is to create a row in the table. So this is what we'll be seeing now, because if I am just choosing over here, I'm mentioning something, and this is the product ID that I have, or I could use any particular product from the drop down. I want to save it. So if I click on it, currently nothing is going to happen. That we have to build the functionality, we have to build along the way. And also what I want to do is add a row for this particular form where I'm mentioning the details of the text box also, because currently we are seeing the text box but we are not seeing what it stands for. So that is one thing that I'm going to add in the HTML template, and then start with the create operation for this form. Okay, so let me just go to inventory.component.html file, and over here I'll add the code for a row which will just describe the fields that we have on the form, and I'll save it and come back to the browser. Over here we are seeing the labels also for the fields, and now what I want is an action being performed when I click on this submit button after filling some values. So for that we have to consider this form and take all of this data and submit the form once the data is filled. For that, what we'll do is I'll have a function created on the TS file. Okay, so here is the TS file related to this component. Now what I am saying is on submit. this should be a function. Return type is void. I don't want anything to be returned, and I just want to alert form submitted successfully. And now how will the form know that this function is to be called? When I am clicking on the button from the HTML file, that link has to be done, right? So for that, what we'll do is just have an ng submit attribute and call the function. So this is the function, and currently we are not validating any field, so I'll just add a no validate attribute also, saving it. One more thing that we have to do is add an import of the form module. So what we are saying is we are asking this particular component to import the forms module and perform the submit action. We are having it in imports, saving the file, going to the browser now, and now I click on submit. So just an alert should come, and here it is. It says form submitted successfully. That is the message that we had given. Over here, if you see, form submitted successfully, right? So currently we are not showing any data which was entered in the fields. We are not just considering any data that was entered in the fields. I just wanted you to show how the form submission would work, and now step by step we'll take the fields also into consideration. So after that, what we are doing, okay, so now for that, what I'm going to do is bind this input field that we have, not just one but all of the input fields, to the variables that we'll access on the component.ts file. So you might already be aware about two-way binding, and that is what we are going to perform here. For that, so I'm just giving the data structure, just giving it some default values. We have product ID, product name, available quantity, it could be 0, and then we have reorder point. Okay, so the values with colons instead of equal to. Okay, so saving it, and I want to take these variables for the two-way binding. So this is the first input field that we have, and I want to provide the model for it, inventory data dot product ID, and also give the name, that is product ID. I think this should suffice. The next one we have is product name, just confirming the name from the TS file. Yes, it's product name. So using the third variable here, available quantity, and then there is the last one, that is reorder point. So just I'll copy the name from here and use it. Okay, so saving it. Now what I want is I just want to show this data also. Okay, what I'm saying is that this is a JSON, right? All of the data would be available in JSON format. For that, I just want to use the stringify function and pass the inventory data in it, saving it. So we'll go to the browser. Over here, what I'm doing is giving some random values. I click on submit, and you see that the alert box is successfully showing all of the fields that are present with their correct values in the JSON format. So this part is successfully achieved. After this, we'll move on to the backend code for the API and create a link to submit the form and send it to the web API request. Okay, so for that I have opened Visual Studio and we are going to select ASP.NET Core Web API. Clicking on next over here. And what I am doing is, in this particular location where we had created our Angular project, I'm going to create the Web API project as well. I want to give it a name. So it could be HOC Gadget Shop API. Next. And now what I want to do is just keep the selected options as such and click on create. So it's created the project for me and opened the solution. Over here we see the files also that are created under the controller folder. This is the default controllers file that is coming. What we are going to do, we are going to add our controller file, and that is going to be an API controller. So I'm right clicking on the controllers folder, click on add and add a controller over here. So from the template, we are going to select the API and we are going to select empty API controller over here. I click on add and now I should be giving the name of the controller as well. So over here it would be inventory controller. Clicking on add. So here I have the file created, and what we want to do is add a function over here. What that function will do, it is going to be an function which will accept the request from the Angular project. So from the front end, the request will come with the inventory details and this particular function will process it. So it should be returning the action result. It's going to be index, or let's have it save inventory data. That could be the name of the function. And this is going to be an HTTP post request. So I'll give that attribute as such. And let me just add a return statement. Otherwise the syntax error would keep on coming over here. It's going to return OK. Inventory details saved successfully. So the basic purpose of this particular function is to process the web request that is coming from the Angular application. Now for that we'll have to create a SQL connection in this function, because the method is going to save the inventory data into the database table through a stored procedure. For that we'll be creating a SQL connection over here. We are getting a syntax error. I'll just import the required libraries. It's going to install the NuGet package automatically. And now in the SQL connection, we can also mention the connection string here only while initializing. So I'm giving the connection string over here. And I already have the value. I can give it over here. Okay. So after this, what we want to do is just log into our DB. Why I'm doing that before is because I want to be ready with my table and stored procedure before I make a call from the .NET to the database. Now over here we have our databases, and gadget shop database is the one that we are going to use for our application. Let's create a new table in this database. I'm just opening a new query. And we'll give the command create table. It could be inventory table with all the fields that we are sending from the front end. Product ID, giving it integer data type. Then we can have product name, and it could obviously be a varchar. The reason is that we'll be passing some string value from the front end. Although we are passing it as a drop down index, but yes, we should be saving it as a string only, because the name will justify the data type over here. And the reorder point would be int again, and we also had available quantity. Okay, so these are going to be the fields, and we can also have an index kind of field which will be identity, integer of course, and it could be a primary key, so that it is never null and always having a unique value. We'll create the table, and now we can also create a stored procedure. What we want to do is we want to save the data, and we can give it exact name that we have over here for the functionality, sp underscore save inventory data. So this is the kind of nomenclature that I follow to define a stored procedure. And what parameters it will take is it's going to take these parameters. And we know that when we are passing a parameter or it is a variable, we are defining a variable in the stored procedure, we'll be giving it @ prefix and then giving the name. So this is the parameter that we are using. Basically 4 parameters. These are the parameters that we are using. And what we want to do is just take the parameters and save it in the table. Going to give the column names that we are saving into. So we have written a insert statement, mentioned the column names, and then we'll give the values that we are inserting. What are the values? Over here we have these parameters. So it's going to insert a single row in the table, because we are not inserting multiple rows at the same time. We're just passing single rows and entering over here in the table. And I think I have to add a parenthesis. Yes, so it should work fine. So you might be seeing that there is a syntax error that it is giving. It says that invalid object name. The reason is because currently the database is not refreshed. I have just created the table and then opened the window for the SQL editor to create a stored procedure. So the database is not refreshed as such. If I open it again, it would work fine if I make a connection to the DB server again. But I'll just execute this particular stored procedure. If it says successfully completed or executed the command, it's working all fine and there is no error in the stored procedure. Otherwise we'll see if you're getting an error. So I'll just execute it. Okay, so command completed successfully. That means the stored procedure is created successfully and all is working fine. There is no error as such. So you could also face this issue that you have already created the table, but it's still saying the object is invalid in the DB, but not to worry. It might take some time. It doesn't take some time to refresh. You have to make the connection again and then it works properly fine. If the next time you're opening the SQL Server Management Studio again, it will not show any error as such. Okay, so let me just go to the .NET code, and over here we have already defined the connection string. Now the next step is to define the SQL command. We've already mentioned the SQL connection. Now we're going to give the SQL command. And how we're going to do it? We have to mention the command text. It's going to be the stored procedure name. Then we have to give the command type. Command type dot stored procedure, and give the SQL connection as well. It's connection here, and then take the variable that we have already defined. Now for the command text, we'll have to give the stored procedure name, exact stored procedure name that we have over here, and mention it in the string. So now this is completed. After this, what we'll be doing is opening the connection. So let me just open the connection. Let me execute the command now. It's going to be an execute non-query because we are not performing any retrieval from the database right now. We are just inserting the data. And we also have to make sure that we are closing the connection because that is very important. It's connection dot close. Now this is all fine. We have mentioned the command text, we have opened the correct connection, and we have executed our stored procedure, and we have closed the connection. But the main task was to pass the request to the database. Now for taking the request, we'll have to create a model that is passed to this function from the front end. Like we had created a data structure in the JSON format on the Angular application. The same way we'll have to define a class in this application also that will accept the request through this function. So let me just add a folder in the solution and we'll give it the name models. Over here I can add a class. It is going to be inventory. Okay, it just got loaded. Inventory request DTO. So this is what we are giving the name to our model. Now we have this class and we can give the properties over here. What parameters will be passed through this class? First is going to be product ID. Second is going to be product name. So it's the benefit of having IntelliSense because it's giving you suggestions as well. Now we don't have product type, but we have available quantity. So that is the name that we are giving. And then we have reorder point. Okay, so let me just mention this last property. and now we can use this class. I'm saving it. We can do a save all and use this class in the request. Okay, so for this also we have to import this library. Now we have to pass it to the SP as well. So let me just add it to the parameters of the SP. Now here in this function, we have to mention the name of the parameter and then give the value that we are trying to pass. So first is the product ID. This is the value that we are trying to pass to this parameter. And then we have 3 other parameters as well. Product name, available quantity, and reorder point. So the reorder point was this. Yes, just confirming that the names are matching exactly with our stored procedure, because if they don't match, we'll get an error while executing the function. So let me just save all of it. Now we'll just run the application to check if the web API is working fine. I'll just close this dialog box because currently we're not setting up SSL certificate. We just want it to run on the local. Okay, so the application is running now, and over here we see the web API that we have created. This was the default that was given by the .NET Core, and now we have this function as well. This is a post method, and over here it's taking these parameters. We can try it out also. What I'll do is I'll just give some random values over here. And give values for all the parameters and click on execute. $200 is the success response code, and that is what we are getting. The body has the custom message that we had given in the function, so it's all working absolutely fine. By executing it, we can see that. But how can we make sure that it is working absolutely fine? We have to go to this particular table and check if the data that we had passed from the request, is it saved or not in the table, because that is the whole motive over here, to save the data into this particular table through the store procedure by making the connection from .NET Core. I click on execute, and over here we see one row is successfully inserted into the table. So we have made the connection from the .NET Core to the database. Now the next step is to make the connection from the Angular application to the .NET Core web API. Now in the Angular code, in inventory.component.ts, where we are submitting the request, we have to post the data to the .NET Core web API. For that, what we'll do is just import HTTP client, and we can have an HTTP client injection in this class. Now this we'll be using to post the data. For that, what are the requirements to post the data? We want to do it on the submission, correct? So here on submit function, in this we'll use this HTTP client, post the data, and we have to pass the URL. So we'll have to define the URL over here as well. It's going to be the API URL, Let me just define it in the function itself for now. And we'll give it the value that we'll be taking from, and paste it in Visual Studio Code. Okay, so we have given the value. Now, yeah, it's going to be let API URL. Then we have to mention the body, correct? So for the body, we have to pass the inventory data. So after passing the body of the request, this is not mandatory, but we can give the HTTP options as well. So if you have some specific header values, you can include it here. Okay, let me just define the HTTP options. Close this. Let HTTP options. So let me give the headers here, and it's going to be new HTTP headers, and then we can give the content type as well. Value could be application slash JSON, because this is what we are going to pass. I'll save it. And over here, what we are going to do is, once we have the post method ready, we have to subscribe to it. This is how it works. We're going to subscribe to this post method, because this is not going to execute simultaneously as we are hitting on submit function. We don't want to wait for it to execute. This is an async call that we are making. And in the subscribe, we'll give the actions that we want to perform. What should happen if there is an error? The main task is to define what should happen once it is completed. So once it is completed, we want to give the function here, and this alert should only happen once the post request is completed. So we'll move it here. Now we have defined the post call in our Angular code. Let me just save it. And we have to make a change in the app.config as well. Over here, we have to provide HTTP client. This function we are defining in the providers and saving. So what I'm going to do is just put a debugger over here, okay, to check if the call is being made to the backend API or not, what request is coming. But before that, there is one more change that we'll have to make. If you focus over here on the URL, you will see that this is localhost colon 7019 is the port that we are using, and in the Angular application that is running, it is 4200. So we'll have to make changes for this .NET Core Web API to handle the CORS request. Now for that, I'll just stop the execution once and open the program.cs file to make the change. As we see over here, we already have some methods being called for the application, so we also have to make the changes for different servers requests that are being passed to this web API. So I'll begin making the changes. Define a variable and give it a value underscore, same name I'm taking over here for the text value. And then we have the builder, right? Various functions of services are getting called, and over here only we'll have to call the add course function also. So I'll make the changes for that. Options dot add policy, give the name that will be the variable that we have just created, and then for the builder we have builder with origins. Okay, so over here we are going to give the URL of the local host that we have. So I'll give the local host 4200 we had. Okay, just switching on my numlock, and then we can have, I think, one without the server name also. This way we have defined, we want to allow any header, we want to allow any method, and set is origin allowed some domains. So after this, one more thing we have to do. Before authorization, we have to call another function, that is use course, and over here also we'll be passing the variable that we have created. Now I'll just save this. Over here we had a syntax error. After this, what we'll do is we'll run the application. Okay, but one more thing, as of now we don't want to return any message from here. We are just returning the OK status. So I'll run the solution now. Why I have removed the message, I'll be picking it up later in the lecture, that we will be sending a JSON rather than a string value from here. So that is one thing that I'll be explaining to you. But as of now, let's just try to save the inventory details. I'll go to the application once, go to the inventory page. Now I'm putting some random values. Okay, I will select mobiles from here. That is another product rather than earphones, because that is the one that we had already entered. Now I click on submit. What it should do is, exactly, it should come over here on the debugger, because now you see that we have made the connection from the front end to the .NET application, to the .NET Core Web API, and when we are clicking on submit on the Angular application, it is pointing to this debugger now. The flow is created, and now I click on continue. So you see, we have got the alert that this particular form has been submitted successfully. That means that once the post call is completed that we had subscribed to, the alert is showing this is what we were trying to do and it is successfully achieved. So I click on OK. How to confirm that our data is getting saved successfully? We'll need to go to the database, and over here I'll just execute it. Okay, so the select statement is executed and we see over here that the data is successfully saved. And over here for the product name, you see that we are passing the index from the drop down, so that is what is getting saved, but the row is successfully created from the application. So we are able to achieve the save flow from the Angular to the .NET Core Web API into the database. After this, what we are going to do is we'll be getting the data from the database on our Angular application, because what you see over here in the table, this is some static data, correct? This is not the data that we have saved in the table. So we need to bring the data from the database to the application on the front end in Angular. So that is the get flow. That is what we are going to achieve now. But now what we'll be doing is we'll be creating the flow from the database to the Angular to get the data that is in the inventory table to this table on the screen. So let's go to the database first. Over here we see that this is the table that we are trying to fetch the details for. Let me just create a procedure and the name will be sp get inventory data. So after this, in this stored procedures, we simply have to add this select query, because we are only trying to get the data from this table and there is no other query that is required over here. I'll click on execute. It says commands completed successfully, that the SP is now successfully created in this database. We can also check it by going on to stored procedures. We have another SP over here, that is SP underscore get inventory data. Now we'll utilize it in the .NET code. So let's go to the Visual Studio and we can just take this code and create another API that is going to be a get API. Earlier one was HTTP post and this is HTTP get. Now what we are trying to do is get inventory data, and we don't want any parameters because we'll be selecting the data from the table without any filter also. So let me just zoom it a bit, and after this we'll also have to change the name of the SP. We'll take the name over here and use it on this command text. We can remove all of this code because we are not trying to pass any parameter to the stored procedure. Now what we are trying to do is we are trying to run the command that is going to be execute reader command, and what we can do is we could have a SQL data reader, give it a name, and using this SQL data reader we will be creating a object. So basically what we want to do is create a list of inventory DTO from this SQL data reader and return it as a result of this action. So let me create another model, because to avoid any confusion in the name I am creating another model, even though the same properties would be there in the new model as well that were there in inventory request DTO. So The name can be inventory DTO. I'm saving it. Take the properties from inventory request DTO only and just have it in this. So to avoid the confusion, we have created a separate model, because if we want to add some properties in the class, in one of the classes, we could do it in future without modifying another class. So let me save this and use it over here. We are trying to create a list of inventory DTO, and when we are traversing through this particular loop, I want to create a object as well that will be added to this list. Let me just give it the name response, and this would be added over here. So what we are trying to do is inventory DTO dot product ID is equal to convert dot to int reader, that is SQL data reader, and the name of the column would be from here. So if we just run this query, we see over here that product ID is returned and product name, available quantity, reorder point. So what we want to do is give the name of this column in our code, because that is what this code is going to read. The whole table would be read in the code, and we want to just take the name of particular column in single line. So right now I'm binding the product ID, so I will give it the name. For each of the columns we have different name, so I'll give a separate name over here, product name. Then over here this would be toString, because product name is a string variable. If you see over here, the data type is string. Then we have available quantity, and then we have reorder point. Let me just match it, reorder point and available quantity. So yes, you have to make sure that the names of the columns that you are giving through the reader, they have to be the exact names that are there in the SQL, because otherwise the data would not be mapped from the SQL data table to your object. Otherwise it would create an issue. But if you give the exact name, then it's not going to be an issue and the code is going to work perfectly fine. So over here you see that IntelliSense is giving me the suggestion as well that we want to add the DTO into this list. So we'll just take the suggestion, and we have successfully added our DTO to the response. And now what we want to do is we simply want to use a JSON convert serialize object, and what we want to serialize is the response. So it will send the response, that is the list of inventory DTO, as a JSON now. And let me just save it, do a save all. We'll run the code again. We can build it also once. We're trying to rebuild the solution so that there is no error in the code that could be checked from here. If the rebuild is completed successfully, it says one succeeded, because we have only one project in the solution. So it means that our code is going to work fine syntactically. Logically it's going to work fine or not, we will be able to know once we execute it. So let me now just execute the solution. And the API, the get API that we added, we are seeing over here on the screen as well. It's added over here. And to verify if the DB to .NET Core Web API, all that connection is working fine or not, we just do a try it out from here and execute the API. It's not going to take any parameters. So you see that parameters is also mentioned over here, that we are not taking any parameters. And now we see the response body. This is a proper JSON that we are getting. We have two products. One was the product name earphones, and then second one was the drop down index that was added from the front end code from the Angular application. Both of those records that were there in the table we see over here, those are coming on the screen successfully over here in the response body. So this connection is successfully established. Now we just need to add the code in the Angular to get it on the front end application. So we'll go to the Visual Studio Code, and in this particular component, inventory.component.ts, what we have to do is whenever the component is initialized, on that point only we are trying to fetch the details. So over here we have to add a new function that is going to be ng-on-init. Once the function is getting initialized, what we want to do is we want to get some data right from the backend. So we already have the URL of inventory API. We can just make sure that the get API also has the same request URL. So over here we see that the request URL remains the same. If we are not passing any parameters, it would be a get call. So let's make the changes for get call using this HTTP client that we had used earlier. And this is going to be a get call. We don't need to pass any headers or the body. We just have to mention the URL. And over here we'll only need to have the response of this get method. So what we can do is just have the data and create a function around it. This data is going to be the response of this get method. Let me just add a new object that is going to be inventory details of type any. Now whatever is being returned from the API, from the get API, I want to just map it to this new object that I have created over here. Once this is done, what I want to do is utilize it on the HTML page. But before that, let me just do one thing. I'll do a console log of whatever is being returned from the API on the web Angular application. Let me just save the details. So let's go to the browser and just open the console window. We'll do a refresh of the page. And now we see over here that we are getting the response from the database on the web application as well. So whatever is being passed from the get method on the web API that we have created over here, we are successfully getting it on the front end as well. So that connection is successfully established. Now the main task is to just bind it to the table, because currently this is all static data. We just need to bind it to this particular table, and then we'll be getting the rows dynamically from the database and not from the static HTML template. So we'll go to the inventory.component.html file, and over here I'll just take this row and create a dynamic row over here. Then we'll comment the static data that we have. First, let us just create the static row. we have to use an ng for this. Let inventory of inventory details. So what is inventory details? It's this particular object that we have created on the component.ts file. I'll just paste it so that the exact name is matching over here. And in this inventory details, for each of the object, we have to bind the property name, the name that we are getting over here. So this is the product ID. So we'll just map it. And after this product ID, we can bind the product name as well. And then we have available quantity with a capital A. So you have to make sure that whatever property name you are giving, it is exactly matching with whatever data you are getting over here, because this is the response from the web API and it is there in your inventory details object. So let's go to this HTML file, and yes, we have made the changes, binded whatever dynamically we are getting on the row. And how many rows will come? The number of rows that are there in the inventory details, the number of objects that are there, those many rows will come in the table of this tag that we have. So let's save the changes, but yes, first let's just comment out whatever static data that we had given earlier, commenting it out, and now saving the changes. Let's go to the page again. It should be reloaded. Yes, because just after saving the changes, we are able to see that the reload is done, and over here we are getting whatever we had saved in the table, that is successfully being fetched on the screen as well. This is all dynamic data. This is not the data that we had given in the HTML template. It's all dynamically being fetched from the table to the Angular application on the screen. So we have successfully established the get flow as well. I hope you have understood whatever we have covered till now. Now what we'll do is we'll create the functionality of this delete button. What if we want to delete a particular record from this inventory details table? For that, we'll have to write what action we want to perform on this delete button. It has to take the selected record and delete it from the table. So let's get to the flow of creating the delete functionality. We'll go to the database, and over here we'll be writing the stored procedure first. We are following the same approach that we did for the get flow. It is going to be delete inventory details, and over here if we just check that in the table, inventory table, what key should we take to delete the record? Product ID would be the appropriate candidate to delete the record from this particular table that we are sending from the front end to back end. What we'll do over here is just take this query, and it's not going to be a select query, it's going to be a delete query. We want to delete the record from inventory table where product ID. This is going to be a filter, so we should define the filter as well. The stored procedure is going to accept a parameter product ID of data type int, and wherever the SQL is able to find a record according to this filter where product ID is equal to @product ID that is being passed to the stored procedure, that record should be deleted. So this is the stored procedure that we are creating for deleting the record. Let me just execute this. It says commands completed successfully. That means that the stored procedure is created over here. If I just refresh it, you will be able to see a third stored procedure for deleting the inventory details. So now we'll use this stored procedure in our .NET Core Web API. I'll just stop the execution and take the help of the existing method to create a new method now. Added an extra curly braces. Now this is going to be a HTTP delete method, and we don't want to get inventory details, we are simply trying to delete them. The stored procedure name we'll be copying from here, and we want to pass the parameter now to this stored procedure. So we'll just remove all of this reading code that we earlier had for get inventory details. We don't want to send any response, just send the OK code as of now, and the command would be execute non-query, because we are not trying to read any data. But before executing the command, we have to pass the parameters. It's going to be the similar approach that we had followed while saving the data. The name is going to be @product ID. This is the exact name that the SP is taking as a parameter. And what should we pass over here? This particular web API method would be accepting a product ID. So this is what will be passed to the stored procedure as well. We'll just save the changes, and now I'll execute the solution. So closing the dialog box, and we have to see if our new web API method is added or not while the solution is running. So over here it is added. This is a delete API that we have created, and we can try it out also. We have to pass the product ID over here. So if we just check what data is existing currently in the table, that we also can see over here that these are the records in the table, right? So we want to delete, let's say, this second one. We can create it also from the front end, so no problem as such. I'll just pass this particular value and click on execute. So over here we are getting a code 200. That means the API is successfully executed. And if we see now in the table, so we are able to see that the second record is deleted. So that means that our API is working perfectly. And now what we have to do is just add the flow from the front end to the .NET Core Web API, so that we are able to delete the record from this particular page. If I just refresh this now, it should have only one record. So yes, it is having one record only. And what we'll do is just add some value over here so that we are able to see multiple records instead of only one. So let me just click on submit. It says form submitted successfully. I click on OK and check the table if the data is inserted or not. So yes, we are able to see the record inserted over here. And what you will be able to see is that the ID column is having value 3. The second row was deleted, right? And after that, as we have set it as an identity column, the next row that would be inserted would take the sequential key only. So the identity would just increment it by 1 and set it to 3. It will not be 2. So that is one thing I hope you all are aware about for the identity columns when they are set in the SQL. And over here, we are able to see that we have successfully inserted the record. But what is not happening is that this table is not getting refreshed. So this is a very good point that we have found while inserting the record again in the table, that the table is not refreshing on the go when we are clicking on submit. For that, what we need to do is, this is the ng-on-init function, right? This is getting the records from the table. This is the second flow that we had created. Now, when I submit the record in the table from the screen, what I want is the table should also get refreshed on the go. So for that, we'll take this method, and once the post is completed, once we have the alert, we also want to refresh the page so that any new data that is inserted in the table, it should reflect on the screen as well. So now if we go over here and I just add some random values again, I click on submit, okay, and you see that the table is getting refreshed now because we have called the ng-on-init function, and as it is only fetching the records as of now, we are able to call it successfully. Otherwise, we should have called another function which was just getting the details. So what we can do over here is, for the reusability approach, we'll just add another function, inventory details, and this function will define it over here. Because ng-on-init was only calling this code, that is why we could easily use it in the on submit functionality as well. But if you have more code in the ng-on-init, if there are some more functionalities that you are performing over here, then it is a better approach to have a separate function for getting the inventory details that you could use in ng-on-init, and then this function can be called on submit as well over here. So now I'll just save the changes over here and we'll go to the screen, make some changes, that is add a new record and click on submit. So everything seems to be perfectly working fine over here. We are able to get the records while we are submitting. We are able to get the latest table details as well. After this, now what we have to do is add the delete flow. For that, what we'll be doing over here, so this is an interesting point now. We have already included Bootstrap in our application. And now we'll be using ng Bootstrap for creating a dialog box that would be displayed once the user clicks on delete button. So when the user clicks on delete button, what should happen is a message should be displayed over here on the screen so as to have a confirmation from the user that they really want to delete the record, because it is a possibility that they clicked on it by mistake and we don't want to just directly delete the record. We want to confirm from the user that they are trying to delete this particular record. Okay, so let us now add the functionality of this button. What do we want to do? In the HTML file, on the delete button click, we want to call a function. Whenever this function is clicked, we want to open confirm dialog. This function can be called, and over here we'll define the function. So which dialog box will it open now? For that, what we'll do is we'll create a new component, and in the dialog box we are going to utilize the model feature of ng Bootstrap. So let us just stop the execution for now and create a new component that can be named dialog box, because I want to keep the HTML structure separate from this particular component. That is why we are creating a dialog box component that could be utilized at multiple places according to the HTML structure that we have. Okay, the HTML structure would go over here, but we have to install the ng bootstrap as well. So let us install ng bootstrap for this, and this is the particular command that we are going to use. So over here we are doing a save with legacy PS depths. It is because we want to eliminate any risk of conflicts that might arise due to peer dependency that ng bootstrap would have. And also we require another installation for this, that is for popper.js/core. After we have installed both of them, we'll be using the HTML template that I have already referenced from the ng bootstrap documentation over here in this component.html file and save it. Now we want to open it from here. Is that correct? From open confirm dialog. So for that we'll be using model service. We are going to inject model service using the ng b model, and you see that the import is automatically done through IntelliSense. I'll save the changes. We are going to utilize this model service to open the model, and in the function we have to pass the content that we want to open. So this is going to be the dialog box component, and once we just mention it over here, it is automatically imported as well. I'll save the changes over here. And in the dialog box component, what we have to do is import ngb active model from ng bootstrap, and then there is a function that we have called while we are clicking on OK. So let me just give it the name confirm over here, and this function we'll just mention here. Over here we don't need to perform any function, but we do need to close the model. So for that what we'll be doing is, on the confirm button, on the confirm function that is being called from here, we'll just have a model.close. So rather than directly closing it over here like this, we are closing it in the TS file, because later on we might need to add some functionality in this particular function. So let's just go to the browser now, and over here we click on delete. So you see the model is opening. We have a dialog box for the confirmation of deletion. So this is working perfectly fine. Now how do we delete the data that is selected? It's not selected through a checkbox. We are directly clicking on the button of a particular record. So how do I make sure that that particular record is deleted? So we'll need to pass the product ID, correct? The product ID that we have over here, we'll need to pass it. Okay, and we see that this product ID is the product name. So let us just change that also in the inventory.component.html. The product ID is the hash that we have over here, and this is the product name. So you see, as you keep on making the changes, you are able to see what perfections you can make to your application. right? So this is the product ID that we need to pass to the .NET Core Web API. When I click on delete, this particular record should be passed to the Web API, this 2131. And how do I do that? I come over here. We already have the inventory.product ID, right? That is being displayed. So we can simply take this and pass it on this function. Why I am doing this? Because when we are opening the confirmation dialog box, a record should be made. There should be a record of which product ID I had clicked on, which product ID's delete button I had clicked on. So for that, I'm passing the inventory.product ID as well from here, and I have to capture it. Okay, it's not going to be int like in the .NET. It's going to be like this. And this product ID can be maintained over here. Let me give it product ID to delete so as to clarify what is the use of this particular variable. Now, as soon as I am passing the product ID from the HTML page to this function, I want to keep a record of it. So when I'm opening the model service, what should happen is the product ID to delete should be set as product ID that is passed from the HTML page. I click on save. Now, once I have saved it, let us just confirm if it is working all fine. Once I have made a record of which product ID is getting deleted. So we can do a console log as well. I come over here, do an inspect, go to console window. I click on delete. So you see, we are getting the product ID 2131, and this is going to be passed to the backend API to be deleted. Now it should only be deleted once I click on OK. If I click on cancel, it should not be deleted. Am I right? So for that, what we'll do is we'll make a record of what is being sent from this dialog box. So how do we do that? In this particular dialog box, once we are closing the dialog box, and we are only closing it on the confirm function, and the confirm function is only called on the click of OK. When we are clicking on cancel, model.dismiss, that is directly called from here, and we are not confirming anything. So on the click on confirm only, we are performing this particular function, and from here we want to pass some result. That result would be, let's say, confirm. This is the result that we are passing from the OK button click. I'll save it, and we need to capture this result as well. So how do we do that? Over here, we have to capture the result. Once we have got the result, I want to perform some action. What kind of action am I performing? I'm going to delete the data. So how do I do that? But the question is not how. There should be a condition that once we have got the result, we are checking also that the result is what we had expected. So if data that we are taking from the result, this data is being passed from here. If the data that we are getting in the result and the property of the data, that is event, as I have mentioned here, its value is equal to confirm. So only if the property of the event is equal to confirm, then something should happen. So let's do a console log over here as well. Confirmed to delete, else delete not required. So I saved it and let's click on OK. So you see, this is being sent from the dialog box. Event is confirmed. And that is how we are able to get into this condition, and it says confirm to delete. Also, now that we think of it, it will never go to the else condition. Why? Because we are not sending any other data, any other result from here. So this particular condition would not be even satisfied, because we have only called confirm functionality from the OK button, and that is sending this particular response. So it's never going to go into the else statement. So that is how we will be able to specify whatever we want to do when the event is equal to confirm. So now over here, what we want to do is we want to delete the inventory details. So this particular function, let's mention over here what we want to do in the delete functionality, and this is going to be a this dot delete inventory. In this particular function, we want to have the API URL that we'll take from here. Okay, let me just give some value as well so that we are able to check the URL. Okay, so this is the URL of the request, and I want to pass it in the HTTP client delete function API URL, and then we could also utilize the HTTP options, or I think we can skip it for now because this is just a delete function. We want to subscribe to it. Whatever data we have got, we just want to do some action once we get the result. But before that, over here you see that this is a static value that is being passed in the URL, but we cannot pass the static value. We have to pass whichever row was selected for the deletion from here. So how do we do that? We are already saving it in this particular variable, so we'll utilize this variable, and because this is under the class scope and not just the function scope, we can directly use it over here. So whatever value is set over here, when this function is called delete inventory, we'll be able to utilize the value in this URL. Okay, so now once we are able to delete the data successfully, after that what we want to do is get the refresh table from the database. So we had created a function earlier, that is what we will be utilizing over here, and this particular function will be called once the data is successfully deleted. So let me just save the changes, and we'll go to the browser now. Okay, I click on delete for this particular record. It says, are you sure you want to delete it? I click on OK, and you see that the event was confirmed, the data is deleted, new refresh data we have got from the database as well. That means the delete functionality is also working fine. If I just add something over here, I click on submit, this is deleted, and now I click on delete, this is also working fine. If I click on submit, let me just click on submit again, add a new row, click on delete and click on cancel. So you see that nothing is happening if we click on cancel. It's only deleting once I click on OK. So this is how we have integrated the dialog model from ng Bootstrap into our application, created the delete functionality with end-to-end flow from Angular to .NET Core Web API till SQL, and all of the data is being refreshed on the go only. Okay, so the save functionality and delete, we have just seen that it is working all fine and we are able to read the data from the table as well. Let's move on to the next functionality, that is edit. So we are going to update the data in the table. For that, let's first move on to our .NET code. We'll create another web API. I'll just stop the execution of the solution and take the help of the existing code to write another web API. This is going to be a HTTP put API. And we want to update inventory data over here. We are going to use inventory request DTO. So in this particular web API, we are going to accept the whole inventory request DTO. We just don't want the product ID or the product name. We are going to accept whole of the inventory request DTO and save whatever is coming from the front end to the back end. Now this particular SP we are going to create in database first. Over here we have the table, inventory table, and this is the data in the table, right? So to select which of the particular column we need to use to update the data, we'll follow the same process that we had done in the deletion of the record. We are going to use the product ID column. Over this column only we'll be putting the where clause and then update the record in the table. Let's create a new stored procedure. Create procedure, the name is going to be update inventory data. So if this particular table is to be used, just let me select something from this table over here. These are the columns in this table. So what I'll do is give the parameters names as well, because we are accepting a single row only, just like we did in save inventory data. This is going to be integer, product name, it's going to be varchar. According to our table, these are the data types that we are using. Then it's available quantity, integer again, and then we have reorder point, that is another integer column. After this, what we are doing over here is we are not selecting anything in this stored procedure. We are trying to update the table, and in this particular stored procedure we want to set the columns with new values, right, that are coming as input from the .NET code to the stored procedure. We have product name, then we have available quantity, then we have reorder point. These are the three columns that we are updating, and which particular record we want to update, that condition will give through where clause on this particular column. We have already selected this column. We use this column while deleting the record as well, so we are updating the record through this column only in the where condition. Wherever the product ID is matching with the one that is being sent from the .NET code to the stored procedure in DB, we want to update that particular record. So it is possible that one of the column is only changed with the new value. We are trying to update all of the columns in one go, because even if one of the columns is not changing, we are still updating it with the old value only. This is the product ID column that we are using for the where clause. Okay, let me execute. And now over here it says commands completed successfully. That means the stored procedure is successfully created in the database. We could also check from here. So now you are able to see that we have this fourth stored procedure, update inventory data. Let me use the name. I'll just copy and paste it over here. This is the stored procedure that we are trying to call now. And now what parameters do we want to pass to this particular stored procedure? We are passing product ID, but it is not from a single input. We want to use the inventory request, and that product ID we are trying to pass to the stored procedure. Then we have another 3 columns. The one is product name. We'll use product name over here from the inventory request. Then we have available quantity. The exact name we'll use over here. Then we have reorder point. So these are the 4 parameters that we are passing to this stored procedure, and we'll keep the command as execute non-query because we are not trying to read any data from the DB. We are only trying to insert the record. Also, you have to make sure that whatever parameter names you are giving over here, these have to exactly match with the ones that are mentioned in the stored procedure, because otherwise it will give you an error while the execution is in progress. So the parameter names should exactly match with the parameters name over here in the stored procedure. Now, after saving, let's execute this solution. Okay. Now you see that we already had 3 existing web APIs. We have another one that is for put. We have created it to update the record in the table, and we can try it out also from here. Now let me just check. Yeah, this is the current table data. Okay, we already have some record, so I'll take this product ID and update it. And the product name is 3, available quantity is this. So let me just take available quantity and the reorder point also from the table. Now what I want to do is I want to update the product name. It is 3 as we have seen in the table. I want to update it to mobiles. I'll click on execute. And you see we are getting 200 success code. We can also verify from the table now. I'll run this query again. Okay, so I hope that you are able to see that we have successfully updated this particular column, product name. All of the other values we had also given as they were old only, those are coming as such, but the product name is updated with the new value mobiles, which was 3 earlier. So our .NET Core Web API is working absolutely fine. Now we need to concentrate on the front-end Angular part to make the connection and execute the update API. Okay, so let's just go to the browser first. Over here, what should happen when we click on edit from the front-end application? When I'm clicking on edit for this particular row, all of these fields should be populated with the row data. So the product ID text box, the name drop down, quantity available, reorder point. All of these should be populated with whichever rows edit button has been clicked on. So let's just go to the solution for that once. Okay, we have to go to Visual Studio Code, and over here we see that the form which is there and the text box, the drop down, the 2 other text boxes, both of these are binded with this ng model inventory data that is there on our component.ts file. Over here we have already made the binding from this particular structure on this form. So what should happen when we click on edit over here on this edit button, click, this particular inventory data should be populated with the row that is selected. And how it would happen, we'll just write the code for that now. So over here we are defining a new function. When I click on edit, it should populate form for edit. Now in this function, which particular data structure should be sent to the component.ts file from HTML? See over here we are traversing through inventory details in the for loop, right? And each of the row is binded through inventory. So this is the inventory detail that we will send to the component.ts file. I'll take the name from here for the function, and in this particular component.ts file we'll write the implementation of this function. This inventory, we'll just give it the type any as of now, and in this component.ts file we have inventory data that we want to bind with this inventory. We cannot simply bind this inventory data to the inventory that we are getting from the HTML. We have to assign each of the fields in inventory data the correct value from inventory. So how do we do that? In inventory data, the field names are like this: product ID, and in inventory we see on HTML that the names are like this: product ID with a capital P. So we'll take the names from here and assign each of the fields this way. After product ID we have product name, and similarly we have product name in HTML like this. Next we'll take the available quantity and bind it to available quantity in inventory data. Then we have reorder point. So you see that we have simply binded the inventory data from the HTML inventory that we are getting as input in this particular function. I'll just save the changes, and on HTML also we are saving the changes. Now let's go to the browser and check if our code is working fine. In the second row I'm clicking on edit. So what happened was I click on edit for the second row, correct? And all of the text boxes are correctly binded, but it is not happening for the drop down. And why is that? Because we were sending index to save at the backend from the HTML page. We have an index associated in our drop down with each of the values. So this is an interesting point over here. For the drop down we have indexes given to our values in the each of the option associated with the text that we are showing in the drop down. So now I am just simply giving the value same as the text that we are displaying, and then we'll see if this is also getting binded correctly when we click on edit. I come over here, the page is refreshed, I click on edit. Okay, so the drop down value is also getting perfectly binded now. All of the fields are getting populated when I click on edit from this particular row. If I just click on edit now here on the first row, this is also working perfectly fine. You see that all of the form data is getting pre-populated when I click on edit. So I hope that this was an interesting point for all of you to learn about the drop down control on the form, that for the drop down options we have a value and the text that is displayed associated with each of the options. We can keep it same also, and we can give it indexes also that we had given earlier. And earlier when we were trying to save the data, value would only get saved to the backend table. Now we have kept the value same as the text of the option, so that would get saved now as a string value. Now over here on the form, you see that we are able to populate the data correctly. But what happens if I just change the product ID from here? Because currently in the table, these two are the product ID values existing, right? And if I change the product ID only, then what will happen? I'll not be able to update any of the record in the table because that product ID would not exist, correct? We already have the where condition, which is checking if the product ID is matching with the one that is being sent from the front end. And if I am able to change the product ID, then there is no point of sending any data to the backend to update. It will not have any record to update. For that particular reason, we'll have to disable the product ID text box over here when we are trying to update the data. And how we'll do that? We'll come over here on the input that we have for product ID. We'll give the disabled attribute, and this particular attribute will be set according to a variable that we'll define in the component.ts file. So I'll give it the name disable product ID input, and we'll take this variable and define it over here in the component.ts file. This would be set to false. We don't want to disable initially. And then what we want to do is, whenever I'm clicking on edit, at that particular time, I want to set it to true. This is what should happen. So whenever I click on edit from this page and the row is getting populated over here, at that time I want to disable it. So let's just save this, and we'll save this also. Now we'll go to the browser once. I click on edit, and you see this is not at all editable. This is disabled. I'm not able to update any value in the product ID text box. So after this, what we want to do is we want to change some values over here. Let's say I want to just update the quantity available. I want to update the reorder point as well, and I want to submit it. If I submit it, the backend update web API should be called. And for that, we'll have to change the submit functionality over here. We already have a function for submit button. Now this is currently saving the data. This is currently doing what? It is calling the post method of the HTTP client, but we want to update the data now. So for that, we'll have to do an HTTP put. But when should we do an HTTP put? We should only do it in case we are trying to submit when the text box product ID is disabled. So that is when we should update the data. Otherwise, when it is enabled, we should be saving the data as we were doing earlier. So that is why we'll have to put a check over here. This dot disable product ID input is equal to true. At that time, we should simply call the put method. Otherwise, we should save the data. So this should work as it is. Let me just format the document. Okay. So whenever the product ID field is disabled, it would call the put method. Otherwise, it would call the post method. So let me just save it. And now we'll go to the screen. We'll click on edit, making the changes again. And you see the values are different from which were given earlier in the table. So I click on submit now. and it says form submitted successfully. I click on OK, and you see, as soon as I clicked on OK, this is showing me the new values over here. So this is working perfectly fine. We can see it in the table also. The values are updated, but as we have already put a fetch call on this particular table when we are submitting, so it shows me the new data in real time, because when I click on OK, the fetch call is instantly made from the backend. Now we'll just do some minor changes on the application just to enhance the look and feel of the application. What we want is, when we click on OK on the alert box, we want that the form should be reset. So for that, what we'll do is, we'll come over here. In the code, what we want to do is, we see that we are calling this particular function get inventory details whenever we are deleting the data, whenever we are saving the data, right? So over here in this function, we want to make a change. Whenever we are getting the fresh data from the table, at that time, our inventory data, this particular data structure that is being binded to the form control, it should be just reset. So we simply want to set it to the new values. And after this, we also have this disable product ID input, right? This should also be set to false, because in case we have edited some data, this would be set to true from this particular function, right? And it would only be set to false when we have explicitly mentioned in some function. And as we are calling this function, every time we are trying to refresh the table, we should set it to false. So this should work now. We'll go to the browser. I'm just adding some new data now. Okay. And I click on submit. So this should add a new row, and you see that the form controls are also getting reset. Let's just try to edit something. As soon as I clicked on edit, product ID is getting disabled. I'm only able to change the values from here. I click on submit, and you see that the product ID field is also getting enabled as soon as I clicked on OK on the alert box, because the refresh, whenever it is happening for the table, it is refreshing the form controls with the product ID input as well. So all the CRUD operations for the inventory page are now completed. We are able to save the data, we are reading the data from the table, and that is all happening in real time, because as soon as we are making any updates like save, delete, edit, we are able to call the read functionality as well. So I hope all of you have understood whatever part we have completed till now. Now, after completing all the CRUD operations for inventory, we'll move on to the next component that we were going to complete for this particular application. We had created two options over here in the dropdown, inventory and customers. So the inventory component is completed with all the CRUD operations. Now we'll move on to the customers component. We'll be creating a new component for this in our code. As of now, if I click on this option, nothing is being displayed except the header that is given in the app.component.html file. So what we'll do is, we'll go to the Visual Studio Code and try to create a new component for the customer. I'll just stop the execution. And what I want to do is ng generate component. In the app.components folder, where we already have inventory component, I am creating a customers component as well. So you see that the customer component is created over here. This is the HTML file for it, and as of now it is showing customer works. So in the app.component.html file, we want to have a router link for customer as well. We already had for inventory. Now we want to add for customer. Over here in the customer option, I'll be mentioning customer over here, and in the app.component.ts, we also want to import customer component. And over here it's saying add import. I'll save this. After this, in the routes.ts file, what we want to do is we want to give another path. We already have given a path for inventory. Now we want to give the path for customer as well. So this path, the value of this path is going to be the same that we have mentioned over here in the HTML file. So I'll just take this and paste it over here so that there are no differences in the two values. And after that, we have to mention the component that we want to use. So over here, it is going to be customer component. So sometimes the import is just done automatically. I have saved this. And after mentioning the new path, what I want to do is I'll just do an ng serve again so that our application is running. And we'll go to the browser through the link. Okay, now I'm going to the customers option. So you see over here, it says customer works. That means we have successfully added a new component in our application for customer, and we have added the router link for it as well. After this, what we are going to do is take a static HTML template for the customer. I already have it referenced from the Bootstrap, and we'll use it over here. We'll be pasting our static HTML template, and after this I'll just save it to check if the changes are getting reflected in the browser or not. So we have come to our browser and we see over here that now the page is showing the new template. On this page we see that we have a button to add a new customer. Then pertaining to each of the row we have edit and delete actions. So now what we'll do is we'll give the functionality for this button first for adding a new customer, because if you see over here in the inventory, we had given the form like this on the inventory page itself, that we could add the new row from here through this form and submit it, right? But in the customers, we have added a little modification. The reason is that you will be able to choose whichever template you want to, and we just have a variation in our application. So now what we want to do is, when we are trying to add a new customer, a new pop-up should be shown with the customer form. That is the basic approach that we are going to follow over here. And for that, what we want to do is add a new dialog component in our application. So let's go to the Visual Studio Code, and I'll just stop the execution again. I want to add a new component in the app components. It is going to be customer dialog. So this is what I want to add to this application. This is a new customer dialog box, and over here we have the HTML file for it. Now in this customer dialog box component.html file, we'll be giving the form template for the new customer. I'll be using the one that I have already referenced from the Bootstrap, and let me just paste it over here. Okay, so you see that we have some input controls for customer information, and then we have a add button over here. Let me just save this. Now when should this dialog box open? It should open when we are trying to add a new customer, right? So in this customer.component.html, we have the button. Over here, when we click on this button, it should open customer dialog. This is the function that we want to give in the customer.component.ts. Over here, we are mentioning the function, and for this we'll be using the model service that we had used for inventory.component.html file when we were trying to delete the record. So let me just have a private model service variable created for it, and we are trying to inject ngb model. And for the inject, we want to import the core module. The options would be mentioned over here. Now after this, we want to use our model service to open customer dialog box component. This is what we are trying to achieve. Let me just save it, and let me save here also the changes that we have made for opening the. Okay, let me just give it the name customer, not custom. It, and over here also the name should be customer. Okay, after this, let's just run our application. Okay, go to the URL, and now when we are coming to customers, when we click on this add a new customer button, you see that the dialog box is opening. So this is working perfectly fine, that we are trying to open a new customer form through this button. This is a different approach that we have used to open the customer form. Over here we can enter the information and then click on add. After this, what we'll do is we'll be working on the functionality for this add button. That should be saving the new row in our database. So let's just go to the database, and over here we'll try to create a new table for customer, and I can give it the name customer details. Okay, now after this, the columns that we have on our HTML, one would be customer ID, then first name, varchar, we'll give it 50. Okay, and then we have last name, email, date of registration. So let me just give it registration date, and it could be of data type. I think we had another, the customer HTML, we can just check. Phone number, yeah, this is the one that we want to add. Okay, got something over here, the email spelling. I'll just save the changes. So you see, when you just keep on going through your code again and again, you'll just find some changes that you want to make it better. Phone, right? It was phone. We'll give it varchar only, and could be of, let's keep it 15 digits. However, we want to save later on with the code or not. Maximum is 10 though. Now we'll create the table, and now what I want to do is I want to create a stored procedure it should be save customer details. We are trying to insert the data in this table, and these are the columns, right? So we'll just mention over here we have to remove the data type in the insert statement. And after this, we want to just take these values and have them as parameters over here. So over here, want to have the parameter names, but these should have the data types. So let me just copy from here once again. Your code helps you to write the further code faster. And now I am giving the parameter names. Yeah, just a syntax error that over here they should come the parameters before as keyword, and we want to insert all of these in the table. So I'm taking the names from here only, and let me just give the character, and we to add the brackets for the values. Okay, and also you might be wondering that how did I give the @ character before each of the variables in one go. So you press shift and alt, and then you just drag the mouse, so you'll be able to add anything. So you could just add any character or delete any character, so it would work for all of the rows. So this is something interesting that I had learned some time back while working on a project in the office. Now we just want to execute this query to create the new procedure. Okay, after this, what we want to do is we want to work on the API. So over here, I'll just stop the execution of this solution. And now you see that we already had the inventory controller, correct? We were working on this one for doing all the CRUD operations for our inventory component. Now what we want to do is we want to add a new controller. And this is going to be an API controller. Let's select the empty one and click on add. Now it will request the name. So we are going to give the name as customer controller. And you see over here, it has already mentioned the route as well. From the inventory controller, we just want to take the help of the first method that we had for saving the inventory data, correct? Now we want to do a similar thing over here. We want to save the customer data. So this is going to be save customer data, and for this want to create a new DTO, going to be customer DTO, customer request DTO. And after that, over here we'll be mentioning the properties. tag in region. This is going to be, then it's going to be the first name. After that, it's going to be last name. So you see, IntelliSense is very helpful. Then we have email. After that, we have phone. And then we have registration date. Okay. We can give a date time. I'll just save this and use this customer request detail over here. The SQL connection would remain the same, but we have a different stored procedure. Now, this is save customer detail. Also, what we can do is we can keep it the naming convention same. So I'm just dropping the stored procedure once and we'll create it again. And we'll create it again with the name sp underscore. Okay, now it says command completed successfully, so we can check over here that in the stored procedure we should have this particular stored procedure as well. So you see that we have got the sp save customer details, and now let's just work on our API. The name of the stored procedure is this one. We have to take it from here. And there are multiple parameters that we are working with. So those also we can take it from here only. One is the customer ID. Then we have first name. Then we have last name. This is the one that we can use over here. After that we have email. And then we have phone and registration date. So you see, these are the different parameters that we are sending to the store procedure through the request detail that we receive from the front end. So that part we'll be covering later. But as of now, we have completed the coding for our web API. So let's just save this and we'll run this solution. Okay, so the solution is running now. So you see over here, we have got our new controller customer and we have created a post method for it for saving the new records in our database. Let's just try it out. We'll give the customer ID some random value and some random values for the email, phone number, okay, let's just keep the registration date as it is and we'll be executing this. You see, we have got a 200 success response, but how do we verify it? We'll go to the database and execute the query to select the data from this table that we have just newly created. So you see, the new record is successfully inserted into the table and we have completed the flow from the web API to the database successfully. Now we'll be working on the flow for creating the connection between the front-end application and the web API. Let's go to the Visual Studio Code now, and over here in the customer dialog box component.html file, we'll need to add a new function that is triggered when we click on the add button. Similar to the one that we had done in inventory component, on this form I'm going to mention ng submit and call a function on submit. For this function we'll be writing the code for. But before we proceed to write the functionality of this function, what we want to make sure is that all the form controls that we have on this page, they are matching with the ones that are required to be sent to the web API. So over here we'll come and click on add a new customer. So you see that we have first name, last name, phone number, registration date, and email, but we don't have customer ID over here. So I'll add a new text box for customer ID. And one more thing we are going to do, we're going to make the changes so that the date is entered through a date picker and not in a text box. So let's make the changes for that. Over here I'll just add a new column. So I'm adding it next to the email for now, and this is going to be customer ID. Or let's do one thing. What we can do is just change this particular form control to phone number. Over here the name should be same, as this is email, it would be email only. And what I want is that the customer ID should come over here. So I'll take this, I'll be taking this and add it over here, and this should be customer ID. The same name is given in the label. Then this is first name, last name, phone number, and email. So this is all fine. Now we need to change the registration date, right? So what we'll do is we'll give the type for this particular control, that is registration date, as date, and the class would be form control only. So I think this is fine. I'll just save it. Okay, it says on submit is not there. So for now I'll just remove this and we'll add it again once we are writing the functionality. Okay, we'll go to the browser, and over here you see that we have a new form now. We have customer ID added because we need to send it to the database for the row to be added for a particular customer. Then this particular registration date, we had a text box in place of the date picker. Now we have a date picker, and through the calendar we can just enter the date over here. Then we have first name, last name, phone number, and email. So this looks perfectly fine. Now we'll be working on the functionality for this add button. So let's go to the Visual Studio Code again, and over here I'll just save this and add a new function also over here so that the error is removed on submit. I'll save it. So you see the error is gone now. So now we'll just start working on the on submit functionality. We'll have a API URL that we'll need to give, and I'll just mention it over here. Before that, we have to write the HTTP options. This is similar to the process that we followed for inventory details. HTTP headers. Then over here, we'll find the properties for it. Authorization. In case you have a token that could be passed through this. And then we have content type. That should be application slash JSON. So headers are defined, and after this, what we want to do is we want to call the post method of customer API. So I'll just take the URL from here itself, because I know that I only need to change the controller name. The rest of the API URL would remain the same. So over here in the API URL, I only have to change the controller name, that is customer. Now for calling the post method, what we need to do is have HTTP client defined over here. We are going to inject the HTTP client, and for this particular error we'll need to do an import of Angular core. After this, what I want is I need to call the HTTP client and we need to post. So we are trying to call the post method, that is all good, but we still haven't defined what we need to send to the backend API to be saved into the database. For that, we'll need to define an object over here that would be mapped to our HTML page and would take the data from the form to the backend API. So let me just define customer details over here, and we have several properties that we need to send. First is customer ID, then we have first name, last name, registration date, phone, and email. Okay, so this is all of the information that we would be sending. But how do we bind the data from the HTML to this particular TS file? For that, I'll just save this once and we'll just take the name of this object. Over here, we'll come to the customer dialog box component.html file. Here we need to bind it. So this is going to be through ng model, and the value would be customer details customer ID, and then we have name property that would be same as the one that we have in the object. So similarly, we'll be giving the ng model for all of the controls. This is for customer ID, then we have registration date. Let me give the correct name over here, and then we'll give the ng model binding for registration date. So this needs to be changed, and the name would be same over here. So let's do it for all of the controls. First name, then similarly it would be for first name. This is phone number, and these are the two. I've given the property as phone, so that is what we are keeping over here. Let me just reconfirm it once on the TS file. Phone, right? Correct over here. I think we have done the bindings for all of the controls. I'll just save it once. Okay, so you see that as soon as I saved it, some errors have come. We have done the binding, but we need to import over here forms module and common module. I think this should fix the error. Yes. Okay, now we'll be working on the post functionality. We want to send this data to our backend API. This dot customer details. Then we need to pass the HTTP options, and we are going to subscribe to this HTTP post method. Just doing a console log over here. For error, we again want to do a console log. But once this is complete, what we want to do is we want to write the functionality for completion of this post method. We are going to give an alert box that gives the message customer details saved successfully. And which details are saved, that we can show through json.stringify by passing the customer details over here. So the functionality is all good. We'll just save it once. After this, we will go to the browser, try to enter new customer information, give some random values. Let me just give some random values over here. And a date. So I'll click on add, and it says customer details successfully saved. Saved successfully, that is the message that we had given. And over here you see this is the object that we are passing to the backend API. And now generally when we are developing an application for the end user, we don't show what particular data they have sent to the backend, right? Because they don't want to see a JSON being shown to them in the message box. This is for our convenience, that we are able to see what all data has been sent, and this is just for development purposes. So I'll click on OK, but we need to confirm that all of the data that we were trying to send has been already saved in the database once we have got the alert box. So for that, we'll just go over here and I'll click on execute. So you see, whatever data we send, this was all random data. We've just sent some random values from the front end, and those are all saved successfully into the database. So the save functionality is working perfectly for the new component that we have created, that is customer. So we can start working on the get flow of the application. But first of all, we'll go to the browser and check at which particular point we want to retrieve the data. So the get flow should happen as soon as I click on the add button. The first thing that would happen is I would receive a message that the customer details are saved successfully. After that, the pop-up should close that is one more thing that we have to add. And once the pop-up is closed, this table that we see on the browser, it should be updated with the new record in the table that is there in DB. So we have to add the get flow as soon as we click on the add button and after we receive the successful response, and whenever this page is loading. So let's say I'm coming to customers, this page, right? Currently we are seeing some static data, so this should not happen. We should be able to see whatever data is there existing in our DB. So we have to add the get flow at two places. So let's see how we'll do that. But first of all, we have to complete the flow for add functionality. Once we have gotten the successful response, we want to close the dialog box for adding a new customer, and we want to do it in the complete function. So for that, we'll be giving the model.close functionality. But first of all, we'll have to define the model. Over here, through inject, I want to inject ngb active model, and this we'll be using over here, this dot model dot close. And once this is closed, we'll be taken back to the customer page over here. So now let's try it. I've saved the record. I'll give some random values. Max Mueller, phone number. Let me just give a random date. I'll add, it says customer details saved successfully. Click on OK, and you see that the model is closed, and we can confirm that the data is saved by executing this particular query. So you see a third record has been entered. After this, let's try to create the get flow from the table. We'll be creating a procedure, get customer details, just following our naming convention. So adding sp underscore, and then simply we have to select the customer details in this stored procedure. I click on execute. It says commands completed successfully. That means the stored procedure is created. So if I just try to check in the stored procedures, over here it is added now. So let's go to our web API solution, stop the execution, and just taking the help of already written function for saving the data. Now what we are doing is we're trying to get the data, give it the appropriate name. We don't want to pass any request over here, and then the stored procedure name would be get customer details. After this, we don't want to pass any parameters to the stored procedures, and once the connection is open, we want to execute reader through SQL data reader. And while the SQL data reader is reading, what we want to do is we want to take all of the data that is there in the result set and create an object for it. So I'll just add a new model. Customer DTO, and I'm taking the help of customer request DTO over here to define the properties, because these are going to be similar to the ones that we defined in customer request detail. Once this is done, over here I want to create a new list of customer video, customer details, or let me just name it customers. Yeah. And then what we'll do is create a DTO that would hold the single record. And once that is done, I want to assign each of the property the value from the table. So this is going to be convert dot string. We have a reader. So column name is customer ID. Okay, got it. Customer ID is integer. And similar to customer ID, we have first name, that would be string. Column name should be over here. Then we have multiple columns. One of them is last name. Then we have phone. We have email. And another is registration date. Got it. And this is going to be date time. This is taking registration over here. Email, phone, and then this. Okay, so I think we're all done with assigning a single row to this particular object. Now what we have to do is we need to add the customer detail to customers. And once this is done, need to just convert this object to JSON and send it as our response from the API. So this is customers. This is the response that we are sending through the get customer data. I'll just save all of it and we'll run this solution. So this is running now. And over here you see that we have a get method added to our customer controller, and we can just try it out. I'll click on execute, and we are getting the response perfectly. All of the data that was there in the table, we are getting it as a JSON in the response body. And this is the same URL that we used for post, just that we are making a call to different method every time through the same URL. So now that this flow is completed to get the data from the DB to the web API, we just need to work on the flow from the front end to the web API, and we'll be able to see the exact data that is there in the DB on our UI application. So let's complete the get flow by going to the Visual Studio Code, and over here what we'll be doing is we need to fetch the data on the load of the customer component, right? So we'll go to the customer component.ts file, and we'll be just mentioning what we want to do in ng on init. Over here we want to get the data. So let me create a separate function similar to the one that we had done in inventory component. We are going to get the customer details, and this function we'll be calling over here. Now here we need to specify which particular URL we want to call. for getting the customer details. So we'll just take the API URL from here. After mentioning the URL, what I need to do is have HTTP client mentioned over here. And we're going to inject HTTP client. So this we need to use in our function to call the get method, and we'll pass the URL. So we are subscribing to the method. Now when we are subscribing to the get method, we will need to assign an object with the result that we receive from the API. So let me just define an object. It's going to be customer details of type any. Now what I want is that once I receive the result from the API, this dot customer details should be assigned that result. So I think we're good over here. Once we receive the data from the get method, we are assigning the customer details the same. Now in our customer.component.html, we already have static data that is there in the table. This will be just replaced with the dynamic data that we are receiving from the web API. So this is the static data over here. What I am doing is just defining a dynamic tr, and we are going to iterate through ng for let customer of customer details. This is the object that we created. Let me just take the help of the static data. And over here, as of now, I am removing all of the static values. And we are also removing the static rows that are there in the table. As of now, I am keeping the bindings blank because let's just see which particular properties we will be binding on the HTML page. So what I'm doing is just doing a console log of customer details, saving this, and over here also we'll save it. Okay, now let's just go to the browser. Currently you are able to see that on the browser all of the static data is removed from the table, and we'll just do an inspect and go to the console. So over here I'm getting an error also, can't bind ng4. Okay, so to remove this particular error, what we need to do is in our customer.component.ts we'll be importing common module. I'll save it and then we'll go to the browser again. So you see that the error is removed, and now we are able to see that the records are there, but we are not seeing any value because we have not done the binding yet. But on the UI we are able to see number of rows that are there in the table, right? You see that edit and delete, these are static values, so 3 rows are generated in the table, but we are not able to see the values because currently we have not done the binding, right? And for the binding, what we need to see is which particular property we need to bind, because this is the value of customer details. We cannot have the camel casing done in the property. This property is starting with the capital C. So this is exactly what we need to bind, and that is why we have not done the binding yet. But now that we know that we don't need to use the customer details similar to this one, like we have done in the customer dialog box, we need to bind it directly to what we are receiving from the web API. So for that, what we'll do is now we can come over here and just have customer dot customer ID. So this is the value that we are binding from the backend. We are doing this for every column. Is going to be customer dot, and then we just check our browser. Then it is first name, last name, phone, registration date, and email, all starting with the capital letters. This is what we need to bind. Customer ID, customer name. And now over here in the customer name, what we are doing is we are giving the first name and last name together, so as to just concatenate and show it on the screen. Email, this is a very important thing that we just went through to check which particular property you are binding. Is if we had just used the one that we had done in customer dialog box component, these were all with camel case because this is what we had defined over here, right? But we are not binding it as per the TS file. We are binding it whatever response we are receiving from the backend. And now the next is I hope you have understood this particular concept properly. And now I'm just saving it, going to the browser again, and you see that we are able to see the data. Whatever data was there on the backend in the table, we are able to see it perfectly. So the get flow is working perfectly fine. If I just try to add a new customer, give some random values over here, click on add. So it says that the customer details are saved. Now when I'm coming over here, you see that this is not getting updated. So this is the second place that we had already discussed earlier, where we need to add the get flow. So let's just go to the Visual Studio Code. So in the Visual Studio Code, we'll just go to the flow that is there, right? We are trying to open the data from the customer.component.ts over here. And once the model is opened, we enter some data into the form. Then we just call the post method of the API. Once it is successfully saved, we are closing the model. So when we are closing the model, what I want to do is send back a result to the customer component. And how do I do that? Over here on the close, we're just sending a result event closed. So this is the result that would be sent back to this customer component. I'm saving it. And now once that is done, I want to go to the customer component, and over here in the open function, I'm taking the result. Once I receive the result, I want to perform a function. Now what I want to perform is I want to check first of all if the data that we have received and there is event property in it, is it equal to the one that we have sent back from here. You see that this is the property that we are sending, right? Event value is closed. So that is what I want to match over here. And if it is matching, then we should just call this dot customer get details. So you're able to see that this is the second point we are calling the get customer details function. First was that we are calling it on the initialization of the page. Whenever we are coming to this particular component, we are calling the get method, and then once we are closing the pop-up after saving the data successfully, at that time also we are trying to call it. So let me just save it and we'll go to the browser again. Now this is reloaded. So all of the get flow is working fine on the customer initialization, but let's just try to add a new customer. Entering some random values again. I'm clicking on add. It says successfully saved. And you see, now the data is getting refreshed as soon as the pop-up is closed, because we have confirmed from the dialog box that we are closing the pop-up, and then once we come back to the customer component, it is checking if we have closed the pop-up. So at that time we should just update this particular table with a new record that was entered. So I hope all of you have understood that we have completed the get flow for this customer component at the two places that we wanted to. After this, what we'll do is we'll work on the delete functionality for this customer component. For the delete functionality, let's go to the database and we'll try to create a stored procedure. P underscore delete customer detail. And now what we want to do is delete from customer details table. But if I just write this query, then all of the data from this table would be deleted. And we don't want that. We want to delete for a particular record. Let's say I have selected this record and trying to click on delete button. So only this particular record should be deleted. So for that, we'll be choosing customer ID as our constraint to delete the data from this table. So this is the check that we are going to put on. Over here, what I want is that particular record should be deleted where customer ID is equal to, and the check should be according to this parameter that we would be passing to this procedure. So wherever the row is matching with the parameter that is passed to the stored procedure, that particular record should be deleted. I'll click on execute. And now the stored procedure is created in the database. If I just refresh, and we are able to see that this stored procedure is added. Now we'll go to the .NET code for our web API. What I'll do is I'll just take the help of this function, and we are writing an HTTP delete method. And the name would be delete customer data. Now I don't want that the whole request DTO is passed. I don't want the whole customer data to be passed to the backend API. I just need the customer ID from the front end to be passed to this web API, and we are keeping the connection string same. The stored procedure name would change. Over here we have the name, so we just use it, and I'll remove all of the other parameters. We are going to pass only this parameter, which is customer ID. Now we have our delete customer data function ready. Once the connection is open, we are just trying to execute the stored procedure, and then we are closing the connection. After this, we are sending the OK response. So I think the whole function is ready. We can just try it out by running the solution. So over here you see that for the customer controller we have a new web API, that is delete method, and if I just click on delete, we are seeing that we need to pass the customer ID. So if we are able to try it out, we'll have to enter a customer ID over here. For that, what we'll do is we'll just click on execute once and see what all data is existing in the customer details table. Now we have 5 records over here, and I want that this random values that we had entered earlier, right, this should be deleted. So I'll select this customer ID and we'll go to the browser, click on execute. We have got the 200 success record, and now if I just execute this query again, we see that only 4 records are existing now. All of the data that was there earlier, it has been deleted. And what we can do is we can just refresh this page and we are able to see that only 4 records are coming over here. One we have already deleted from the backend web API. So the backend flow is completed for the delete method. Now we'll just work on front end to web API connection, and then we can just click on this delete button and we'll be able to delete the data from the UI as well. So for that, we'll need to write the code for this button. Let's go to the Visual Studio, and over here, if we just check customer.component.html file, over here on the HTML file, this is the delete button that we want to add the functionality to. But we don't directly want to just delete the data, because what if the user has mistakenly clicked on the delete button, right? So we want the user to confirm if they are sure to delete that particular record. For that, what we'll do is we are giving a function open. This is not going to be customer but confirm dialog, that the user should confirm if they are ready to delete this data, and have this function created in the TS file as well. Now what this function would do is it would open the model, and that is going to be dialog component. So I hope you all remember that we have already used the dialog component in the inventory component as well, and it would just open it. First of all, we are just trying to open it, okay, and then we'll see what happens. Save it here, and here also we'll go to the browser, and now let me just click on delete button. So we see that we have successfully opened the confirmation dialog box from this delete button. But what should happen? If I click on cancel, nothing should be deleted. So that is working perfectly fine, because we have already written the functionality for the cancel button earlier. But when we are clicking on OK, then the record should be deleted, right? So that is the pending portion over here, that we are going to write the functionality for deleting the record of the customer when we click on OK. And how do we accomplish that? When we were clicking on OK, we were sending the event as confirm from the dialog box. So that is what we would accept on the customer component now, and then delete the record. Let's just go to our solution over here on the Visual Studio Code, and over here we can see that we are sending a confirm event from the dialog box, and in case we click on cancel, at that time what is happening is it is simply closing the dialog box. So in the event that the user clicks on cancel, nothing would happen. But when the user click on OK, at that time the confirm function is getting called and we are sending the event as confirm. So that is what we would accept over here also. We can take the help of inventory component right now and just use that code over here. So what I want to do is I just want to have the result now of the dialog box. In the customer component, if I'm opening the dialog box, we are taking the result and then we will be deleting the customer. This is what we are going to do. So let me just have a function created for it. Delete customer details, and this is the function that we want to call when we are receiving the event as confirmed. So only if the user has confirmed, then we are deleting the record. Now let's just give the functionality for deleting the record, which is the URL that we are going to take over here. That would be from the browser itself. Over here you can see that we have this URL, and this is the one that we'll be putting over here. Now for the delete functionality, we have already made sure that a check would be passed for the where clause, and that would be customer ID. So this is what we require over here in this function to be passed to the delete method of the HTTP client. But how do we get that particular customer ID? That would be passed from the HTML. This is the customer ID, and this needs to be passed to the function that we are trying to call from the TS file. So we accept it over here, and then can simply pass it to this function. We just save here also. After this, we need to pass this customer ID with this URL. For that, we'll be just using HTTP client, call the delete method, pass the API URL with customer ID, and we are subscribing to the method. So after saving the changes, we'll just go to the browser, and if I click on delete, it says, are you sure you want to delete the record? I can cancel it, so nothing is happening. Now if I just click on OK on this confirm box, currently also nothing is happening. But if I just check over here in the DB, has the record been deleted? So yes, the record is deleted successfully, but on the UI we are not able to see it. Why is that? Because we have not refreshed the table after deleting the record from here. So for that, what we'll do is, in the Visual Studio Code, when we have subscribed, right, when we are getting the result from the delete API, at that particular point, what we want to do is just call get customer details method. So now I'll save it. We'll go to the browser again, and I just add some random values over here because I want to delete this random data. Click on add, and now I want to delete it. So I click on OK, and you see that the table is getting refreshed. So the delete functionality is working perfectly, because after we have deleted the record, we are refreshing the table as well. And that is all happening by just passing the customer ID from the HTML page. So I hope all of you have understood the delete functionality that we have covered till now. After this, what we'll be doing is we'll be working on the edit functionality. But before proceeding on it, we have to make a minor change over here. You see that on the table that we are seeing on the UI, the registration date is having the time also. That is because we had kept the variable as date time in the .NET Web API. So for that, we'll be making the changes. Over here, we need to change it to string. So let me just make the registration date as string, and then this could be convert.toString. We'll save the changes, and in the store procedure, when we are fetching the details, we need to make sure that string is being fetched from the table. So this is a conversion technique that I am explaining to you, and this is very helpful when we are working on the stored procedures, because generally you would have data in your table in some format, but you need to get it in some other format. So for that, we can cast the data. Now just to fetch the column names, I am selecting the table and doing Alt F1 on the keyboard. This gives me the data definition for the table. We can take the column names from here, and what I want is add a comma. Now for the registration date, as varchar, yeah, and we can keep it 12 as of now, and the column name can be registration date only. So why I have to mention all of the columns separately? Because I want to perform a cast on a particular column. So if we are just putting a star with the select keyword, we'll not be able to put cast function on a selected column. For that, we have to mention the column name separately over here. Now we are altering the procedure. I click on execute and it says commands completed successfully. To verify that our changes are working perfectly fine, we can just execute this stored procedure in the database. So now this is giving me records over here in the same format that the table is there, but this would be now varchar. So what we can do is just go to the solution and run it once. And now that it is running over here in the get method, you can just try it out. I click on execute and you are able to see that the registration date that we are fetching now from the table, it is not having a time associated with it. Otherwise, it had assigned a default time in the .NET code. So now we'll go to the browser and just refresh the page over here. So you see that the registration date is coming without the time. So this is what we were intending to do and we have achieved it. Now after this, we can move on to the edit functionality as well. So for the delete functionality, let's first go to the database to create a stored procedure. Now we are creating a procedure to update customer details. And what we'll be doing here, have an update query for customer details table. Now in the table, we know that we have some columns, right? Customer details. These are the columns that we have. So as we have selected earlier customer ID column for deleting the record, so this seems to be the appropriate candidate to edit the records as well. So we'll be using this in the constraint when we are trying to update the record, and these are the remaining columns that we'll be updating the values for. So whatever data we are getting from the front end, all of that we'll be updating in the store procedure. Over here, I want to update first name. But what do I want to update the first name with? I will have to pass a parameter for the first name to this stored procedure. And similarly, for all the remaining columns, those parameters would be passed. I'll just take the column names from this table. These are the column names that would be passed. We do need to pass the customer ID as well, because how would we update the record without passing the customer ID? This is of type int. Then we have varchar. This was, I think, 50. Then the same we can keep for the last name. Email, registration date can be date only, and then we have phone. which would be just varchar for now. Okay. After this, what we are going to do is set the first name with the first name that we have received as a parameter. Last name, then we have email, registration date, and then the last is phone. So all of these we are updating, but which particular record we want to update it for? It is only when customer ID is matching with the one that is passed from the web API customer ID. So the parameter that we receive in the stored procedure, if the record's value is matching with it, then we want to update all of these columns. So this is the update query that we'll be using in our stored procedure for updating the customer details. I'll click on execute. So the stored procedure has been created now. Let's go to the web API. I'll stop the execution. So we can take the help of inventory controller and just use the update function to write the same for customer as well. Over here it's going to be HTTP put request, and then we have update customer data. Here we are passing customer request DTO, and the stored procedure name we'll be taking from here. Now we want to pass all the parameters here for the customer details. So those we can just take from the save method. And this request DTO can be changed to customer request. All of the parameters are also set now. We just have to execute the stored procedure, and whatever values we are passing, those will be updated accordingly through this SP. Now let me just save it and we'll run the solution. Now that the solution is running, we can just go over to our database once and check over here which particular record we want to update. So I'll just select this one and we'll go to the browser. So you see over here that a put request method has been added. You can try it out. Now these are the values that we need to pass. So the customer ID would be the one that we have selected. We're keeping the names same only. And for the email, what we'll do is we'll change the email over here. Let me just copy the phone number, or what we can do is just change the phone number rather than the email. And this date also can remain the same, and I'll execute it. We have got a 200 success response. Now we can verify our data for this particular customer in the DB. You see that these are the updated values that we have sent. We have changed the phone number only here. And in the DB, if we see, this is the old phone number that we had. So I'll just have a query on a different query editor and execute it. So over here, we are able to see that this is the new phone number that we have given from the web API, and this is updated correctly through the update method. Over here, this is the old one that we had in the table. So we have built the connection from the web API to the DB, and the update method is working perfectly fine. What we'll do is we'll go to the Visual Studio Code to make the changes for the front end to web API connection. But before that, let me just go to the UI once again. We have the edit button over here, and for the inventory what we had done is we had a form on the page itself which we were populating when we were clicking on the edit button, but now we have a dialog box when we are adding a new customer. So what we want to do is, this is a very interesting portion, we want to populate this particular dialog box when we click on edit button. As soon as I click on edit, the pop-up should open, and this pop-up should have the values pre-populated from the record. So I can change the values from here by entering some new values, and then I'll click on save or update. That should update the record in the DB, and I should have a fresh data over here on the table. So this is what we are trying to achieve. Let's see how we can do that. So we'll go to the Visual Studio, and over here you see that this is the customer component.ts. The customer component.html is having that edit button, right? So we need to have a button action related to this. When we are clicking it, we want to open the edit dialog box. For the delete, what we were doing is opening the confirmation dialog box. Now we want to open the edit dialog box, and this is the function that we'll have to create over here. What this should do is, now in this function we are using the model service to open customer dialog box component. Now I'm able to open the customer dialog box component through this particular statement, but how do I pass the customer information? Over here on the HTML you see that we have a row associated with the customer, and when I click on edit, this particular information should be passed. So this is the customer data that I would need to pass to the customer dialog box component. And when we are passing it, first of all we need to be able to receive the data in customer dialog box component. So for that, what we'll have to do is, over here we are taking it as input, defining a private customer variable of type any, and just import Angular core. Now I'm saving it. Once done, what we have to do is, when I'm clicking on edit and calling this function, I should be passing the customer. Whole information needs to be passed. For the delete, we had only passed the customer ID, but now when I am updating, I would need to require to pass the whole customer object. Save it. Okay, so it's giving error because we need to accept it also in the function. I'll save it again. Error is gone. So I'm able to receive the information in this function, but now I need to pass it to this component. And for that, what we'll do is just define this as a const model reference, giving it a random name, and model reference component instance property. This is what we need to define. Over here in the component instance, we have to give the exact name of the property that we defined over here. So as soon as the dialog box is initialized, customer value would be set from here. And over here, we need to give the object. First is the customer ID property. Then we have first name, first name, name, email, registration date, the last is phone. So we have set all of the values, all the properties have been defined over here. So you could wonder that why we have not taken the names over here of the properties as camel case, because over here we are accepting it, because this is being accepted over here, and even though it is of type any, I am just making sure that it is matching with the object that we have already used in the customer dialog box component. But over here we have to use this name with the capital letter in the starting, because this is what is being used on the HTML page. This is the one that we have been receiving from the web API, and we have directly mapped it on the HTML. So you have to make sure that all of the property names you are giving correctly for the application to be working perfectly. Then after this, what we'll need to do is, I'll just save this once. Over here, when we have got the data of the customer, we need to map it to the HTML, right? When we go to the HTML, we see that we already have a binding in place for customer details. So what we can do is, we can utilize this customer details object only and initialize it with this value if we are updating a record. And how do we do that? We have, okay, we don't have ng init in this class currently, so I'll add it. In the ng on init function, what we need to do is this dot customer details. It should be set to customer, but should it be set every time when the object is getting initialized? No, it should not be. It should only be initialized in case we are receiving any data in this particular object, that is customer. So that means when we are trying to edit, only that time it should be initialized with this value. Now what I can do is, I can give an if condition customer is not equal to null. At that time we need to just set this customer details with this value. I'll save it, and now we'll go to the browser once. Over here it's refreshed already. After saving, I'll click on edit. So you see that we are able to perfectly get the data from that table into this particular pop-up. That record is populating on the dialog box. But this add label is not looking very appealing over here, because we are not trying to add any data. We're trying to update the record. So what we can do is, we can update the text as well for the button. And one more thing we'll need to do is, just similar to inventory, that we need to disable the editing of this particular text box when we are trying to update the record, because this is the constraint that we are using at the backend to update the record. We cannot change its value. This is similar to the inventory component that we have achieved. Now we'll be disabling it over here as well when we are trying to open the dialog box for updating a record. So let me just go back to the Visual Studio Code, and over here in this customer dialog box component, when we are setting the customer details with customer, at that time we are trying to update the record, right? So over here we'll make the changes, but we'll check the HTML first. In this, the label is set as static currently, right? So we can give some value over here. dynamically. For that, let me just define a variable button text of type string. So it can be, initially it can be add. Okay, so this is the initial value that we are giving, that is a default value, and this is what we can use over here and just save it. Now button text should be set as date. I'll just save it, go back to the browser. Over here, when I am adding a new customer, at that time it is add, so it is taking the default value, but when I'm editing it, it's coming as update. So this is working. Now we'll make the changes for disabling. Over here where we have defined button text, we can give a bool value for disable customer ID input. So initially it will be false. I don't want to disable it initially, but as soon as I'm trying to update, it should be set to true. And we'll take this over here on the HTML page, customer ID disabled is being set through this variable. I'll save it. Now we can check the browser again. So when I click on edit, you see that this is not editable right now. So this is also working perfectly now. We have made the required UI changes for our update dialog box, and the add dialog box is also working perfectly. Now over here, we have to make the changes to send this data to the backend now. So we'll go to the Visual Studio. Now in this component, we need to make the changes to update the data, right? If we check the button for editing, this is the button that we are using, right? But this is the button that we are using for saving the data as well. So what we'll need to do is, we'll need to make the changes on this button functionality only. On submit is the function that is being used for that button click. And now I need to add a check which can make sure that either the user is trying to edit the record or save the record. So we already have made the changes for these two variables to verify if the user is trying to edit or update. So we can take any of these. I'll take the bool one, and over here, if this is true, at that time I should edit, otherwise I should just save the record. And that save functionality is already working through post method. Okay, now over here in this if, we need to have the functionality for put. So I can just take the help of this code. We are trying to call the put method. The API URL remains the same. We'll be passing the customer details only because this is set through this function when we are trying to update the data. And we can just update this message, and then we are closing the dialog box as soon as we click on the OK for the alert box. So this is also perfect. I'll just save it and we'll go to the browser. Now on the UI, I'll click on edit for this record, and I am updating the phone number again. Let me give it a different value so that it is easier to remember. Okay, it's starting with 3625. I click on update, and it's not updating over here, but let's just verify on the DB ones. This is the old value. I click on execute again. So we are getting the new value over here. That means the API is working perfectly, but it's not showing on the UI over here. Let's just check the code. Now, customer dialog box component, we are sending the event as closed. In the customer component, when we were opening for adding, we were receiving it. Got it. That over here, we are not receiving the result, because in open customer dialog, we have been receiving the result. We are checking if the event is closed, then we are refreshing the table. So this statement we have to just take and add over here in model reference dot result dot then we have got the result from customer dialog box component. Then we are checking if the event is closed, then we are refreshing the table. Save it. We'll go to the browser again. Now over here we are seeing the refresh data, because after saving the page always reloads, right? So now just let me click on edit and give it a new value, this one only, and then click on update. So it says this is updated now, and now we are seeing the new value over here. So this is working perfectly fine now. If I have the old value, I click on edit, enter some new information, and it is updated successfully over here. So the table is also getting refreshed as soon as I am clicking on update over here. And for the add also, if we are adding a new customer, then we don't have this text box disabled and the button displays add only. So I hope all of you have understood the CRUD operations that we have completed for inventory and customer component. We did some UI enhancements as well, and some additional features that we have given to the application to make it perfect for the end user. Now this was the last video for this particular application. We'll be coming out with a new application soon. Thank you.